from there. So we want to start from the far end. Adam?
That works for me.
Okay, Adam, it's all yours.
Can everybody hear me?
No.
Now can everybody? Good? Everyone can hear me?
Yeah.
All right, good. So first, I'd like to thank the ACLU and their partners in setting up this event, and also the congregation for hosting us. When the opportunity arose to be more than 1,000 miles away from DC for the next few days, I work in the Project on Criminal Justice at the Cato Institute in DC. I work on issues of the drug war, police militarization, civil asset forfeiture, mass incarceration, and we've taken a keen interest in criminal justice reform for a long time. We've been opponents of the drug war for a long time because we've seen the kind of deleterious effect that the drug war has on our prison population, on our societies, on our constitutional jurisprudence. And so over the past several years, it's been heartening. It's unfortunate how it came about, but over the past several years, thanks to unrest in places like Ferguson, places like Baltimore, we're having a much broader criminal justice reform conversation than we've had in the past. And it's great to have so many people from diverse backgrounds and from different sides of the aisle acknowledge that there's a problem here and get together to discuss the things that we can do to fix it, because we have to fix it. Our incarceration rate is an obscenity. It really is on a global scale. And this is we like to proclaim ourselves the freest country on earth, the land of the free. But as was mentioned, we have 1/4 of the world's incarcerated population, and that doesn't sit well with many more people today than in the past, and that's heartening, I think. My colleagues are going to discuss more Florida-specific issues with the state criminal justice system here. I thought I could give a little broader overview to show that Florida does have specific problems, but the problems in our criminal justice system are national problems. These are not isolated incidents. These are institutional problems around the country. I mentioned the drug war. The drug war is part and parcel of our fetish, basically, for incarcerating nonviolent offenders in this country, and that's one of the reasons that our incarceration rate looks like it does, because we have so many people in prison who did not commit violent crimes and are still in prison anyway. When I talk about police militarization, when I say a SWAT raid, I'm referring to police in basically paramilitary gear, flak jackets, helmets, assault rifles, kicking in people's doors at 3 in the morning, throwing everybody on the ground, throwing flash grenades, shooting the dog. Just to get an idea, how many SWAT raids do you think happen in this country every year? Any guess? 5,000? I wish it were 5,000. The best numbers we have, and this data is out of date, but the best data we have on this is somewhere between 50 and 80,000. The vast majority, SWAT teams were invented for hostage situations, for active shooters, for barricaded suspects, for serious situations where routine police enforcement couldn't work. But today, the vast majority of these SWAT raids are serving search warrants. And the vast majority of these search warrants are looking for drugs. So, in furtherance of this drug prohibition, the federal government then plies state and local law enforcement with equipment, with weaponry, with funding to purchase this equipment. And you can see this problem, you can see the incentives that are created then by prohibition, and we can look at many of the problems in our criminal justice system and tie them directly back to drug prohibition. I like being a little Socratic about these things. So, plea bargains. What percentage of criminal cases in this country do you think end in plea bargains rather than trials? Somewhere between 95 and 98% of cases. So that's one of the main points I want to get across to people who haven't interacted that much with the criminal justice system is it is not the way you think it is. Everybody watches Law and Order or they watch The Practice and they think that's what our criminal justice system is, but it's not. 95% of the time it is a guilty plea and then a negotiation on sentencing. The prosecutor doesn't have to prove their case. They don't have to submit the evidence to the judge. You just get the plea deal, and now we're having a discussion about do you want to exercise your constitutional right to go to trial, or do you want a better sentence to go home? That's the position that we put people in our criminal justice system today. And if you accept the idea that the only people who plead guilty are guilty people, that makes it okay with you. But we know that that's not true. We know that innocent people can be made to plead guilty, or in many cases, that it's perfectly rational for them to plead guilty because the lack of faith they have in the criminal justice system to give them a fair shake if they go to trial, the lack of faith they have in judges and prosecutors and jurors of their peers, makes it rational for people to plead guilty to things they didn't do. That ties right into mandatory minimums. I'm sure many of you are familiar with mandatory minimums, but there was an intense desire in the 80s and 90s to crack down on the crime wave. And we started to see this idea that judges were being too lenient and people were getting sentences that didn't quite jive. People in similar situations were getting vastly different sentences. So we started to see the proliferation of mandatory minimums, which took sentencing discretion, away from judges and juries and put it in the hands of prosecutors. What it said was, if you get convicted of X crime, you must serve at least 5 years. You must serve at least 10 years. And for many of these, a lot of mandatory minimums are used on nonviolent offenses, like drug crimes. So this takes the ability of the judge, who is best positioned to analyze the facts of the case, who has seen the evidence, and talked to the people involved in the case. That judge now doesn't have discretion. Now that discretion has moved to the prosecutor, who decides what to charge you with in the first place. That's how this negotiation goes now, is you're negotiating with the prosecutor. I think this is especially one of the reasons I wanted to come down here and start talking to people at the state level is because, as many of you know, the new administration considers itself a law and order administration. And the new nominee for Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, has made a career out of being a law and order Attorney General that does not want the federal government meddling in state and local law enforcement. So insofar as we've been working a lot, we've worked a lot at Cato, I've worked a lot on federal criminal justice reform and efforts, for instance, in the Department of Justice to hold local police departments accountable and transparent. I think it would be reasonable to anticipate that is going to recede a bit, and a lot of this reform effort now is going to have to take place at the state level, and that's why I'm more than happy to come down here and speak with you. And so now you'll hear more about the Florida specific issues, but I'm more than happy to take questions and hear what you have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Adam. Before I call on the next participant, I can't help, you don't know me, I'm from New Jersey. I was a criminal trial lawyer, actually, public defender, handled at least 15 death penalty cases. I spent my life in the courtroom, and I only have to mention one thing: plea bargains. Practically every trial that I had started with a plea bargain where the guy wanted to plead. And many times, more than many times actually, he was acquitted. So plea bargain is an essential, a majority of the action is involved in plea bargains. We can talk more about that later. Deborah, are you ready?
Yes, sir. Thank you, I am Deborah Brodsky. I'm actually from Florida State University, not the University of Florida. I'm not a PhD. I was a policy wonk. Been working in criminal justice for about 10 years. My organization is dedicated to advancing public safety through research and evidence, and we are a collaboration of several institutions of higher learning, including Baylor University, Florida State, as I mentioned, Tallahassee Community College, St. Pete College, and we've got board members from FAMU and also from Edward Waters College. So we are dedicated to advancing public safety here in Florida. That is a bit of a challenge. We are far behind where the rest of the country is in criminal justice reform, which is why it's great to have partners from all sides of the aisles, I guess. And I work very closely with our friends at the ACLU, SPLC, James Madison Institute, which is our market-based think tank in Tallahassee. And we all come to the same conclusion: the system is broken and needs to be fixed. And I want to give you a little grounding sort of in the size and scale of our Department of Corrections. I think that's sort of the dumping ground of all of these problems, so I start there. We have 100,000 prisoners in the Department of Corrections, but we also have about 140,000 people who are on some form of community supervision probation. We no longer have parole, so there's a very small population of folks who were sentenced prior to our elimination of parole, and they're monitored by the Florida Commission on Offender Review. It used to be the Parole Commission. So it's a very small part of our population that's monitored. We are not only the world's largest jailer of the United States, Florida itself is an overachiever in incarceration as well. We're about 10th in the nation, 24% higher than what is the national average. So if you took our population of folks in jails and prisons, we've got another 50,000 people on any given day sitting in our local county jails, 35,000 of whom are not yet convicted, possibly never convicted, pretrial defendants. These are folks who have been arrested and booked, and for the vast majority of them probably sitting in there because they can't post their bail. So we've got a very dysfunctional system, and what we haven't done, I think, that is remarkable and sort of keeps us an outlier in the rest of the country. In fact, one of our colleagues who's from the Charles Koch Institute, Vikram Reddy, calls us the great white whale of criminal justice reform. Well, we need to stop that. We need to change that. And there's just so many places that we can make lots of changes. One of the things I wanted to talk about was just to give you a little bit better perspective on what our Department of Corrections looks like. As I mentioned, 100,000 people inside those prison walls, which is about $2.4 billion annually in our state budget, which is roughly about 9-10% of our general appropriations too. So of all the discretionary money in our state, about 10% of it goes to the Department of Corrections. We have 21,000 employees for the Florida Department of Corrections. The total state employee population in Florida is about 107. So about 1 in every 4 state employees is a Department of Corrections employee, and that's still not sufficient. We are understaffed severely with a huge turnover. The average, I think, length of stay, or excuse me, the average Department of Corrections correctional officers has been, I think, 50% are there less than 2 years. They've been incredibly inexperienced, and we also have 2,500 vacancies. We've been going to other states, to Georgia, to recruit, and we can't keep people here because we pay our folks $29,000, and it's a horrible place to work. So we've got a serious funding, sort of underfunding, languishing environment where we've sort of exacerbated the normal problems of prisons. Prisons are terrible places. They are dark, they are brutal in many cases, and the folks who come inside of them don't just stay inside. The activity between our institutions is very dynamic. So you've got, on average, 30,000 people coming in and out of the system every year. 100,000 people, 30,000 in, 30,000 out. That population, if you took, as I mentioned, the scale of it, if you took the population of the Department of Corrections, it is larger than 44 of our state's 67 counties. So basically we're a Latchville County Department of Corrections. And so for years it has languished, it has been a serious place where it hasn't been prioritized, and it is immensely fixable. There are lots of places where we can start to talk about this. I think my friends from the ACLU will have some specific recommendations recommendations, but I want to give you an idea of who's going in, so we can start to talk about ways that we can adjust things. This is brand new. I've got a piece of research that's coming out, hopefully in the next couple of weeks, but you guys are getting a little preliminary shot. So, I'm going to look at 2015 admissions, because I think it's better to probably look at what's going on right now. It gives you a good idea of what the population looks like. Just under 7,000 people were admitted in 2015 who were incarcerated for a violation of probation. So that's of the 30,000 people who came in last year, 7,000 were violations of probation. Another 1,358 were returned to prison for largely technical violations of parole or some other form of conditional release. So of that smaller population that I talked about, that managed population of about 5,000 people, a large percentage of those folks fail. Nearly 3/4 of people admitted to prison in fiscal year 2015 were incarcerated for a non-violent offense. Probation and prison are closely intertwined. This is part of why I talk about it as a system. It's not just the Department of Corrections, it's the community around it. It's certainly the jails as well. They're very closely intertwined. In 2015, 38% of people admitted to prison were on probation when they were sentenced to prison. The people sentenced to prison while they were on probation decreased 35% since the Department of Corrections abandoned the zero tolerance policy in 2008. So that tells you we have the opportunity through policy changes to actually change the direction, and have already successfully started to do that, but it's still not enough. And here's one that I think is probably very relevant given some recent media attention. Despite the fact that blacks and whites use drugs at very similar rates, black Floridians are 7.5 times more likely to be in prison today for a drug offense than white Floridians. So this is a problem of I think has just recently been really opened up in the eyes of the press. And Sarasota Herald Tribune did a great study that looked at some data in a very targeted way that drilled down to the judges level and showed the sort of racial disparities across the state. It's not unusual. This is happening all over the country. So we're not unusual, but it's also not an acceptable place to land. So overall, admissions have dropped in the Department of Corrections, which is a good thing. When I first started looking at this, our population was up about 103,000 people. We're down just below 100 right now, and our admissions have dropped 25%. But the prison population has consistently stayed at the same level because people get very, very, very long sentences here in Florida. In fact, there was a study done that was commissioned by the state that took a look at us in terms of sort of bang for our buck, recidivism, the result of folks who are in the prison system who come out and come back in for the same sort of offenses with similar in different states that have shorter sentences, we get the same recidivism results. So that tells us we could get the same bad results with a shorter sentence. And I think someone had asked me earlier to talk a little bit about recidivism. I want to do that also. The Department of Corrections has a well-published recidivism rate of about 26%. That is, people who are released from the Department of Corrections in the prisons that come back into the community within 3 years will go back. 26% of them will go back to the Department of Corrections institutions. That doesn't tell the whole story. So the folks who go in and then come back out within 3 years, in your community, in all the communities in Florida, it's about 69% will be rearrested within three years. So you have a very different set of that. Part of that has to do with sort of how we manage our population once it's released. Florida, again, is an outlier in terms of how many people are on probation. Not that I want to encourage it, because I think probation is seriously challenged and also understaffed and underfunded. And so I think 65% of our folks who are released from prison get released without any form of supervision whatsoever. And I caution you with that number because it isn't necessarily something we want to do more of when the system itself is not working as it should and actually supporting people as a return. We act as enforcement and not as rehabilitation, and that's a serious flaw in the system. And And one of the things I think that's really sort of interesting is while we do have very long sentences for a lot of offenses that whack with what is rational, we also have this high volume of folks. About 50% of the admissions are about, they get sentenced to less than 2 years. And so there's this also high volume of people in and out, with 30,000 in and out. So a lot of those folks are there for a very short amount of time. And as a result, just the processing time and sort of the way that we manage the population when it comes inside, they don't get very much while they're there. They get very little. In fact, last I looked, it was about $1 a day per prisoner for programming. And if you take a look at our, I'm taking way too long. If you take a look at our sort of the budget pie of the Department of Corrections, the vast majority of that pie is going just to security, which, as I mentioned before, is understaffed and underfunded. And then you have a very small portion, 10% about, that goes to probation. That's 140,000 people that are managed in our community. And then the programming is somewhere around 3% of our total pie of the $2.4 billion. So there's a lot of places where if we started to do things differently, we started to look at the population and in the hopes of really shrinking its scale to better manage the system, because it is a place where people need to go. There are places and there are people that are dangerous and need to be housed, but the vast majority of these folks we handle safely in our community for less money and to better effect.
Thank you, Deborah. In all probability, everybody in this audience, no one's been in jail, am I right? I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand. I recommend something that I read years ago. In fact, I used part of it in one of my trials, a ballad by Oscar Wilde called The Ballad of Reading Jail. If you want to get the feel of what it's like to be in jail, I'm going to whet your appetite and recite one stanza for you. I know not whether laws be right or whether laws be wrong. All we know that lie in jail are that the walls are strong. Each day is like a year whose days are long. Ballad of Reading Jail. Are we ready? Are you ready? Lena, are you ready?
First, let me thank everybody for coming out tonight. I think the only way Florida passes comprehensive reforms, criminal justice reforms, is if it's a priority with voters. And seeing this room here full tonight, it really just puts a smile on my face because I know it's a priority for you. So there was one word that Deb used that really stood out in my mind, and that was outlier. Florida is not just a little backwards. It's not just kind of on the bottom of the spectrum. It's an outlier. We send more youth, children, to adult court than any other state, and it's not even close. From 1990 to 2009, the length of prison sentences in Florida increased more than any other state in our country. They increased by 166% over a 20-year period. And it's the clearest for me when you look at the difference between Florida and New York. In 2000, both Florida and New York had approximately 70,000 people in prison. New York passed comprehensive reforms, and Florida continued to be tough on crime. Well, 15, 16 years later, Florida's prison population went from 70,000 to 100,000. And New York's went from 70,000 down to 55,000. What's amazing is that both New York and Florida saw 54% reductions in crime. Mass incarceration doesn't reduce crime. What it does is it costs our state over $2 billion a year. So I'm leading up a new campaign that the ACLU is starting. For the last 100 years, the ACLU has really fought their battles inside of the courtroom. And they're now starting a new effort through ballot initiatives, through legislative lobbying, and through public education to reform our criminal justice system. So I just real quickly want to go over some of our top priorities so that you can have a better understanding of what the ACLU is focused on and what we think would have the most effect on Florida's criminal justice system. So as I mentioned, direct file. We direct file more youth into adult court than any other state. Our short-term goal is to end mandatory direct file, and our 5-year goal is to end direct file of youth into adult court without judicial approval. We have 107 mandatory minimums in Florida. 107. In the last 20 years, one mandatory minimum has been reformed. Ending mandatory minimums, or at least creating a safety valve that allows a judge to use discretion and to not use mandatory minimum, is one of our top priorities. Out of the 100,000 inmates in Florida prisons, over 20,000 are defined as elderly, which in the Florida Department of Corrections is over the age of 50, not what's more traditional, over the age of 65. And those inmates cost about 3 times as much to house as inmates under the age of 50. We want to expand an existing program, conditional medical release, which is currently only available to inmates over the age of 65 who have served over 50% of their sentence and have less than 12 months to live. We want to expand that to inmates that are over the age of 65, have served over half their sentence, are no longer a threat to society, and have poor or deteriorating health, but might actually have 2 or 3 years to live, or 5 or 10. We currently have a youth civil citation program that is being used just over 40% of, it's a statewide program, that's being used just over 40% of the instances that it could be used. And unfortunately, this is causing cities or counties like Miami-Dade that are a little more progressive to use it 90 or 95% of the time, and counties like Polk County, which are a little more conservative, to use it 0% of the time. What we want to do is to make it a presumption or a requirement for officers to issue youth civil citations, so that if you happen to be in this county, or you upset the officer, or you are of a different ethnicity of the officer, that it doesn't matter, that the youth will have the same opportunity. We want to create an adult civil citation program so that officers no longer have to choose between making an arrest or letting somebody off with a warning. They can now issue a civil citation, which increases revenue for the state and, of course, helps keep people out of prison and jail. We want to fight the war on drugs. Both of the panelists up here have spoken about it. I think everybody here is aware of the effect that it has had on our state. So decriminalizing marijuana and reclassifying other drugs in instances where it is for personal consumption, not trafficking, not for sale, not for distribution, personal consumption. We want to reclassify those down to misdemeanors. And lastly, we want to end truth in sentencing. In Florida, inmates have to serve 85% of their sentence. This is once again, we are an outlier. That is at the absolute highest end of the spectrum compared to the other 49 states. And it is simply keeping inmates in jail and prison for longer. But it's not reducing crime, and it's not reducing recidivism. So I'm going to get into all these priorities a little bit more as we go on, but that's my 5-minute summary.
Thank you, Randy. I think now we moderate. Am I right there? Is that we're going now? I guess we moderate. What do you say? I'm going to ask the panel. Any one of you can ask. What do you say to someone